All right, we're going to continue our study in the book of James. We're on pages 17 to 18 of your notes, and we are on Roman number 1, where it says, rich warned, the rich warned. We're in James chapter 5, verses 1 through 6, and here James is dealing with those that are rich and dealing with the problems with their money. As I said last week, I'm a capitalist. I believe in the free trade and the capitalism way of doing things and all the rest of that. But at the same time, I think we've lost our way. And I think there is such a thing as being too rich. And I think there is such a thing as we have enough. And I'm not saying that we should put government limits on or whatever. It's not a political discussion. You know, sometimes I think we get mixed up with our church. As Bible believers, we reject the social gospel in the sense that we believe in the gospel of Jesus Christ, the death, burial, and resurrection of Christ, and that's what people need. And the social gospel is churches that say, no, we just need to help change people. And as long as we change people, that's all we need to do. So we got to solve the social problems. Now, the balance is we believe in the gospel, but Jesus cared about the social needs of his day. And it cares about the social needs of today. And one of the ways to reach people is through the gospel. But we're not just a social gospel. But there's also a political gospel. I think a lot of churches have gotten mixed up between the Constitution and the Bible. And they've taken some political rights like gun rights or freedom of speech or other things, which are good constitutional rights, but they're not necessarily biblical rights in the same sense as constitutional rights. And sometimes people forget that and they mix them up. And it's the same thing with capitalism. I think there's a financial gospel where people think that they mix up capitalism with Christianity. And I think Christianity does support many of the tenets of capitalism. I believe that if you do not work, you should not eat. If you're able to work, you should. And if you're not able to work, then that's where we step in to help you out. And I believe that people should be able to keep the labor of their hands. And I think the Bible teaches those things. But we are not a financial gospel. And we got to be careful that sometimes we mix these up. And so James says, wait a minute, let's take a look at the rich. And probably most of the people he's writing to is like you and me and say, well, I can skip the passage because I'm not rich. And the truth is most of us are, by Bible standards, as far as lifestyle and what we have, we're very rich. The average person, even the poor person today, has more than even the rich people had in their day: indoor plumbing, electricity, cars, TV, I mean, all the rest of it. We've got a lot of those things available to us. So we're rich. And financially, in America, compared to the rest of the world, we're rich. And so we can't reject this. We may not be filthy rich. We may not be Steve Jobs or Gates or somebody else rich, but we are rich. And there's principles here that we can apply to ourselves as well in the dangers of riches. He's not saying if you're rich, you're ungodly. He's not saying it's wrong to have money. I do think it's wrong to have excess. When you start seeing some of the things that people do and have in their homes and in their lives, there's an excess there that I think can be wrong for a Christian. But God doesn't say it's wrong to have money and wrong to be able to have nice things even, but we need to have our priorities straight. And that's what he's talking about here in this passage. So in James chapter 5, verses 1 through 6, we're looking at, he says, "Go to now, you rich men, weep and howl for your miseries that shall come upon you. Your riches are corrupted, your garments are moth-eaten, your gold and silver is cankered, and the rest of them shall be a witness against you. And you shall eat your flesh as it were fire. Yea, ye have heaped treasure together for last days. Behold, the hire the laborers who have reaped down your fields, which is of you, kept back by fraud, crieth, and the cries of them which have reaped are entered into the ears of the Lord of Sabaoth. You have lived in pleasure on the earth and been wanton. You have nourished your hearts as in a day of slaughter. You have condemned and killed the just, and he doth not resist you." And so, is it a sin to be rich? No. 1 Timothy chapter 6 tells us that it's the love of money, not money that's evil, but the love of money. What's the sin is when that becomes the priority of my life, when that becomes, like we talked about on Sunday, the high places, it's a higher priority to God. When it becomes my idol that I bow down to worship and give my life to, that's when it becomes a sin. It's not a sin to be rich, but what are we going to do with those riches? What are we going to do with the money? And I want you to look over 1 Timothy chapter 6, and I want you to look at verses 9 and 10, 1 Timothy, or 6 through 10. 1 Timothy chapter 6 and verses 6 through 10. He said, but godliness with contentment is great gain. For we brought nothing into this world, and it's certain we can carry nothing out. And having food and raiment, lest there would be content. But they that will be rich fall into temptation and a snare, and in many foolish and hurtful lusts, which drown men in destruction and perdition. Having more money leads to a lack of contentment. I forget who it was. Some rich guy said, somebody asked him, how much more money do you need? He says, $1 more. And it's always $1 more, $1 more. Just got to have a little bit more. And that's when we fall into the trap of riches, when we've got to have more and we're not satisfied with what we have. I want to earn more money. I want to invest and get more money from my investments. I'm not going to complain if somebody gives me money. That's not. But at the same time, I'm happy. This is where the Lord has me, and there's a contentment that's there. And having more money leads to a lack of contentment very often. It's never going to be enough. Having money tends to keep us from doing what? I want you to kind of answer that online here. What does it keep us? If you've got money, what are you going to struggle with in your Christian walk? And so I want to get some answers on that. And then what should we use our riches for? Let's say I've got money. I've got enough to meet my needs and even maybe beyond that. And so I do have riches. And so what should I do with those riches? Now remember, there's examples in the Bible where Jesus commended the woman who had 2 pennies, and she put it all in the offering. So her riches were her 2 pennies. And so what should we do with those riches? And then the third question, I'm going to give you a chance to answer all 3 of these. Why should the rich man weep and howl? That's what it tells us back in James chapter 5. It tells, go to now, you rich men, weep and howl for your miseries. We don't think if I had a lot of money, I wouldn't be weeping and howling. I'd be celebrating. I wouldn't be miserable. I'd be happy. So what does he mean by that? And so do we have some answers coming in on any of those?
Yeah. So one of the ones that, some of the ones here are trusting in God or relying on God. Another one, it keeps us from satisfaction in the little things. Another one, it can keep us from spending time with God in the Word, prayer, and fellowship with others. Trusting in money rather than in God. It keeps us from depending on God's blessings. Trusting our Father. It keeps us from trusting our Father that He'll provide our needs, or it keeps us from fully relying on God.
I think that's what it comes down to. You heard over and over again, trusting in God. Having riches tends to keep us from trusting in God. 1 Timothy 6:17, charge them that are rich in this world that they be not high-minded, nor trust in uncertain riches, but in the living God who giveth us richly all things to enjoy. And when you have money in the bank, you don't have to pray. I can go buy it. When you have money in the bank, you don't have to have faith. And so it does take away. When we first started out in the ministry, we came here to Hawaii with, I think it was a high of $850 a month support, average about $650 to $700 a month. Now, even back in 1980, that wasn't much money. And every month we just had to really say, Lord, here's the bills. You got to pay these. And we'd have to trust the Lord to do that. And then finally came a point a number of years later where the church, I wouldn't say I've ever been overpaid, but the church began to pay us really a living salary. And that was a blessing. But I remember one of the first times after we started getting paid a living salary, I put all the bills down. I did what I always did before. I said, Lord, here's all the bills you're going to need to provide. And it was like, I don't believe the Lord speaks to you in an audible voice today, but it's like he's saying to me, I did. You got a paycheck now. And it's almost like, and I wanted to say back to the Lord, can we go back to faith? Because then it was amazing to see him provide. And it was almost easier to have faith than to have to budget. And so it was a blessing in that. So I think sometimes when we have a lot of money, we miss out on that faith. And so if you do have money, if you're in a job where I've got a good amount of money, first of all, I think you need to budget it and use it wisely and not just spend it because you have it. But I think also you need to look for other ways then to trust God in this financial areas. And some of that is by maybe giving. I'm going to trust God by giving more than I can afford to give. I'm going to trust God by, you got to find other ways to trust the Lord. And for those of us that don't have a lot of money, in Visa we trust. I look back at my life, how many times when a tire went flat or something broke down or we had a bill come in, rather than getting on my knees and saying, God, you need to provide, I just pulled out the Visa and used that. and I can take care of it later. Now, I don't do debt, and we haven't in our entire life, really. But I've seen many times where, okay, I can put it on the Visa now, and I'll figure out how to pay for it later, and before the bill comes in. But too many of us, we trust in our bank account or we trust in Visa. We're not rich, but we are rich because we got this big credit line, and we end up trusting in that and getting ourselves in trouble. So I think that's what happens so often with that. Okay, what should we use the riches for?
Yeah, so a couple of ones here for that is we can use our riches for missions. Or excuse me, we can give our riches to missions or the less fortunate brothers and sisters in Christ. We can use our riches to further the kingdom of God, to provide for those in need.
Okay. I think our first step is to use it wisely as good stewards of God. If we don't take care of our family, we're worse than infidel, the Bible says. And I think we need to use it wisely in our own lives. And that means budgeting, and that means determining what do I really need. And again, I don't think it's wrong to even have wants. And I can afford it, and I want to have this, as long as God is still first, and I've not neglected my giving to others before I give to myself. I think is the idea there. And so I think we need to use it wisely as good stewards in our own lives. And I've read about a number of people who had money, and yet they still lived in a regular house and didn't go out and buy a mansion. They still drove a regular car, and in fact, I think Dave Ramsey's done studies where he found most millionaires drive like a 5-year-old car, and most millionaires live in a house that's not much bigger and better than our houses. And so it's being a good steward of what we have. And then with that, going beyond that, in 1 Timothy 6:18, it says, they that do good, that be rich in good works, ready to distribute, willing to communicate. And so there's a rich in good works. So what can I do with this? God's given me this. Now what can I use it for in the way of doing good works, in the way of distributing to others and communicating, which are for 3 very different things. Good works is, here's a organization I can support, or here's some project I could support. Distributing is distributing to those that have less and have needs. Right now, there's a lot of people that need distributing because they're out of jobs, they're out of food and everything else. And then communicate is to communicate in the way of spiritual communication to missionaries, evangelists, pastors, and others that are feeding us. And that talks about that in Galatians chapter 5, and also in I think it's Corinthians, where it says the labor is worthy of his hire. And so that's where the idea of the word communicate comes from. And so we should be using it for those purposes. So then why should the rich man weep and howl?
So we've gotten 2 responses on this one specifically. One was rich people should weep and howl as believers because with great gifts there are higher expectations from God and how they use that to further his kingdom.
Okay.
Another one was weeping and howling. The hurt of a loss at a funeral is great. The pain one feels without the grace of God is much worse. Riches has the ability to taint one's focus to him, Jesus, for his glory.
Okay. I think it's not limited to the unsaved, but I think we can apply it. Jesus told the parable of the rich man who had great grain, he built bigger towers and all the rest of it, and then he died and woke up in hell. And so I think that to realize that, and he talked about, it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle, which you can debate whether it's a real needle or the needle gate in Jerusalem, but it's still either way it would have been hard, than for a rich man to go to heaven. Because why? Because when you have riches, you're not trusting God, you're trusting yourself. And quite often, not everybody, I've got some people I know that are millionaires, multimillionaires, and are godly people, love the Lord. But I think you probably could say as a whole that the rich people that we know of in the United States, the richest ones, they have no belief or trust in God. And so they, somebody like Bill Gates, if he's not saved, which as far as I know, he has no testimony of that, should weep and howl because he's going to wake up one day in hell and all his riches aren't going to do him any good. So I think it does apply to the unsaved, and talking about that, your riches aren't going to get you into heaven. And I think that applies there. But I think also what applies is for us as Christians to weep and howl is that the dangers of it. Again, when you have money, there's a lot of dangers. And that's why I think God has not chosen to give a lot of us money. Sometimes I say, God, you could trust me with money. And then I realize, maybe not. Maybe you're smart not to give me more money than I have. And so we need to realize that money can cause us to lose our focus on God. Having money can keep you focused on the pleasures of life instead of the pleasures of God. In James chapter 4, verse 9, it says, be afflicted and mourn and weep. Let your laughter be turned to mourning, your joy to heaviness. Is to realize that, God, I've got riches, but I don't want them to take me away from you and my focus on you either. And so we want to keep that point in mind, I think, with that. All right. Let's look at a couple passages and just to reference them. Luke chapter 6. And look at letter C, by the way. What are the two extremes you want to avoid? And we're going to look at that. So kind of think about that, and we'll talk about that in a minute too. And then because of this teaching, what should we do? And we'll talk about that. But Luke chapter 6, verses 23 and 24 is dealing with, it says, rejoice ye that day and leap for joy. For behold, your reward is great in heaven, for in like manner did their fathers unto the prophets. But woe unto you that are rich, for you received your consolation. When it's all you have is riches, then when this life is over, you got nothing. And so that's what he's saying there in that passage. In Luke chapter 12, verses 16 through 21. It's interesting, all these passages come from Luke. Luke was a doctor, or maybe he was a little more wealthy and understood the dangers of riches. So he's the one that really pointed out when Jesus talked about riches where the other gospels didn't so much. Luke chapter 12, verse 16 is the rich man who woke up in hell. Thou fool, this night thy soul shall be required of thee. All he worked for belongs to somebody else. And you think of so many millionaires and billionaires that their riches now belong to somebody else. And you can't take it to heaven with you. And then Luke chapter 16, verses 19, and then 22 and 23. There was a certain rich man which was clothed in purple and fine linen and fared sumptuously every day. And then, of course, there's Lazarus. And it came to pass that the beggar died and was carried by the angels into Abraham's bosom. The rich man also died and was buried. And in hell he lifted up his eyes, being in torment, and seeth Abraham afar off and Lazarus in his bosom. So, all those riches are no good in hell. And so we need to remember that. So what are the two extremes we want to avoid? So while we're turning over Proverbs, do you have any answers to that?
I think one so far, the statement was, you don't want to be so rich you trust in money, or so poor you steal.
Exactly, and that's what the passage here refers to in Proverbs chapter 30 and verses 7 through 9. It says, two things have I required of thee. Deny me them not before I die. Remove far from me vanity and lies. Give me neither poverty nor riches. Feed me with food convenient for me. Lest I be full and deny thee and say, who is the Lord? Or lest I be poor and steal and take the name of my God in vain. And so I think both extremes. When you're so poor that all you think about is where am I going to get my next dollar from? Where am I going to get my next meal from? How am I going to pay the rent tomorrow? Then you're not trusting the Lord. You're focused on those things. And I've been at places like that in my life. And when I first went into ministry, I almost had this philosophy that, I don't want to take much money. And I look back now, early on when we started Ohana, I wish we had either had more support or maybe I've been willing to take a little bit, been more financially stable at that point for the sake of my family and for less problems that we had to deal with at the time.
I think what may be helpful here for perspective, you guys came with a high of 850, more like 5 to 6, right? The average church planter that's coming now, a lot of them that are coming to Hawaii now are coming with upwards to 10 grand a month in support, and they're struggling to make ends meet with that, with trying to start a church as well as get their family settled.
Right, because the church planter's paying for the building they're in.
Yeah, that's not a $10,000 a month salary.
Yeah.
That's, I've got to meet all the needs of the church, or I've got to save that for a building in the future, or a startup cost, like I've got to buy equipment, vehicle,
and even back in
materials.
1980 when I came, the recommended support for a missionary going to Hawaii was about $3,000 to $4,000 minimum.
So that's a massive gap.
But the point, and I'm not here to make people feel sorry for me. I don't. God's been good, and God is good. But I do also look at these guys now, and at first I was kind of 10,000, but then I realized, wait a minute, that gives them more stability, and it gives them a better foundation. And there's things that we struggled for longer because we were financially, not as strong. as a family and as a church, that maybe if we'd had more support, we'd been better off. So I can see, what it's saying here is, listen, don't be so poor that you're always having to worry about this. Now, there's an advantage of that too, and that's the faith aspect. Those early years were great years of faith. And there's times I kind of covet, I wish I could go back to that. And there's a good aspect of that. But there's a balance of the two. And then so much riches, and I've seen this with many people's lives where they get a little bit extra money, and all of a sudden now, we got to go out on the weekends and do this, and we got to spend money on that, and then they're buying things that are really a waste, and they're no longer giving to the Lord, and it changes your whole attitude, and you begin to trust in those riches instead. And so we want to avoid both extremes and in our lives as much as we can. Now, God is in control, and he may sometimes make you poor because that's what you need. And he may sometimes make you rich because he knows you can handle it. And there's other times you become rich and you can't handle it. And so, but we know that God is in control. We want to trust him with that. But I think at the same time, there's a point where we look at, okay, I've got enough now. I'm going to start, and you even see this with some of the billionaires. They're starting to at least realize that, okay, I can't spend $1 billion. I mean, I read a study one time where it said if you have this much money, you'd have to spend like $1 million a day for your whole lifetime to spend it all. And they're beginning to realize that, and they're giving it away to charities and stuff. But I think they waited a little long on that. I think we as Christians need to start that early. Okay, I've got enough. Now I need to look outside myself in these areas of projects, of giving to projects or giving to people's needs or giving to the work of the ministry and doing that. Okay, so because of this teaching, turn over to Matthew chapter 6. Verses 19 through 21. Matthew chapter 6, verses 19 through 21. It says, lay not for yourselves treasures upon earth, where moth and rust doth corrupt, and where thieves break through nor steal. But lay up for yourself treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust doth corrupt, and where thieves do not break through nor steal. For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. And so what we should do is just lay up our treasure in heaven. Make sure that what I'm doing. So when I'm spending money on my family in the right way, I'm laying up treasure in heaven. When I spend money on giving my tithe and my offering or giving to need in these different areas, I'm laying up treasure in heaven. It's not automatic, though. I can do that and still not be laying up treasure in heaven, but because I can do it for the wrong reasons. But we should realize that God gives me money as a steward to use it wisely. And how does God want me to use that money is what we should be looking at. Okay, so what does it mean, shall eat your flesh? Back in James chapter, and this is an answer online, James 5:3, your gold and silver is cankered, and the rest of them shall be a witness against you, and shall eat your flesh as it were fire. You have heaped up treasure together for the last days. And so what does it mean to eat your flesh? Is that a literal thing? Is that a figurative thing? And how does it apply figuratively as well? So see if you can give me an answer on that, and taking a look at that. And then what does James mean by heaped treasure together? Again, verse number 3. You have heaped treasure together for the last days. And so what does he mean by that? So both those phrases are kind of strange phrases, and we need to define them so we understand what they mean. So any responses there?
Not quite yet.
Okay. Again, I encourage you to look ahead in the questions, and you can always respond even if I haven't asked it. And Caleb will jump in if you give me a response I didn't ask for. And also, and if we don't, you just typed it in.
Yeah. Well, while we wait for a second for some responses here, there's I was thinking as you were talking about how we use our riches, and how it's riches is not just money, it's things, it's needs, it's wants, it's sumptuousness, and the same kind of goes on the flip side for what we can do with our riches. Over the years at Ohana, whether either I've known people personally or I've known of people in the church that have been, for lack of a better term, big givers. People who have been more blessed financially, and as a result, in a lot of cases, we're very much always looking for opportunities to give. And there's kind of like I think, as at least in my view, you can almost divide them up into two categories. There's a group of people who had more financially, and they were always looking to give. Or they would give a lot because of that. Their giving was larger. Not that we go and look at, but you just kind of know. But then there's another group of people who it wasn't always the financial gifts that they were giving as much as looking for opportunity. Yes, they still gave, they tithed, but as much as the other flip side was looking for the opportunities, the needs within the church, whether it be the church physically or the church itself or the church body, to meet those needs. I can think of one guy that we had here for a while. He was single. He was a military officer and actually worked in finance in the military. And we were talking one day, and he kind of jokingly said how he didn't actually know how much he made because it was just direct deposit. So he didn't know what he made every month. He's like, I guess I could go look it up. He's in the military. That's all publicly available information. But there was a whole interesting situation that happened with that. Somebody kind of was like, well, then how do you know how much you're supposed to tithe? And I kind of had to bite my tongue because I knew that this guy gave financially well above, I can guarantee, well above what his technical tithe would have been. But I also knew that he was always looking for needs within the church body and trying to meet them. Sometimes it was just to simply be a blessing. He's in the singles group, and I was in the singles group at the time. We'd be out just as a group, and he just pay for everyone's meal just because he could, and he wanted to be a blessing to the rest of the group.
Right.
Other times there was other needs that I had kind of heard about through the grapevine that he had gone ahead and found out about somebody's need and went ahead and met that. And just how giving and this opportunity to use our riches in a positive way is more than just, oh, my tithe check is large.
Yeah.
But-
And that's, we're again going back to 1 Timothy 6:18, that they do good, that they be rich in good works, ready to distribute, willing to communicate. So we're not just talking about everybody should tithe. I believe that with all my heart, not as a legalistic point of view, but because we love the Lord. And 10% is taught throughout the scriptures. I could give you all kinds of arguments about it. And everybody should give their tithe. That's what belongs to the Lord. And they should give their offerings, tithes and offerings. You see those words together all over there. And whether it's missions offerings or other offerings, but this is more than that. And it's not just so I can give more money, because remember, the widow gave 2 mites, and Jesus commended her over all the rich men. They gave out of their abundance. She gave out of her poverty. And that's what 1 Corinthians chapter 8, verses 1 through 5 talks about. They gave out of their poverty and gave way more. Studies have shown that the poorer you are, the larger percentage you give to charity. And the richer you are, the less percentage you give. Now, they may give more dollar-wise, but they give less. And so there's a balance of those two things. But it is more than just tithes and offerings. We're talking about the riches where you go beyond that, and you're doing good with your money.
Give yourselves.
And you're giving, and so here's a person who's they lost your job, you're going to be right there. Here's a person that's going through an illness, you'll be right there. They just doing this. When I was a kid, we were very poor, and I remember a number of times where somebody would buy we'd go out afterwards, and if I had to buy, I was going to drink water, and somebody, without me having to say a word, they would just order me food or buy me food. They didn't even think about it because that was their attitude, and they had the ability to do that.
Let me also say that this goes beyond just financial needs being met.
Right.
We can be giving of ourselves in so many other ways beyond that, but this specifically we are talking about finances.
But even we can be rich in many other areas. You can be rich in more than just money. And so that goes
So
with
a
it.
couple of things for eat your flesh. One is to consume you. Another one, rotting from the inside. Another comment, maybe lowering your personal standards and taking it easy, kind of relating it to drinking to excess, and then you become a drunkard and your flesh is ruined by cancer, other problems. Taking over your whole focus, or the love of money.
Okay. Now, this could again apply to being in hell, but I think it really talks about eroding your character. So all those statements were good ways to put it. It erodes your character when you've got money, and you see this in people's lives. When they get money, they change. When they get money, they leave their old friends. They're no longer doing the things, they change, and it erodes your character. Your focus comes on, I've got to have this and I've got to have that. I think of the gold-plated toilet seats, things like that. It just erodes your character, and I think that's what we see happen. That's what he's talking about. When you have a lot of money, you're in danger, and you got to be careful here with that. Okay, so what does he mean by heaped treasure together for the last days? Any comments on that one?
Not that I see about that one just yet.
Okay. All right. Well, Romans 2:5 says, but after the hardness and impenitent heart treasures up unto thyself wrath against the day of wrath and revelation of the righteous judgment of God. And so if I were you, next to James chapter 5, verse 3, if you don't have a cross-reference for Romans 2:5, I'd write that in there because I think they go together. You're laying up treasure. In other words, when you're not using your money the way you should as a Christian, you're going to stand before God to give account of that. And all the things you could have been building up treasure in heaven are going to be rust and corruption and all this it talks about here. It's going to be gone. And, gold doesn't rust, but in heaven it's going to. It's going to be gone. And so the heap up treasure, you're heaping up the wrong kind of treasure. And for the future in your life as well. Okay, it is not wrong to save or invest for the future, though. Okay, he's not saying you shouldn't save for the future or invest for the future. I'm coming to retirement years, and I've realized I haven't saved as much as I should have, and I wasn't wise to prepare for those days. And again, we have to try. We talked about this earlier on with James. When you plan on tomorrow, you boast of tomorrow. You're expecting, beginning this year, who would have expected the stock market to drop as drastically as it did? Who would expect to lose so much money in their investments? Because they boasted on tomorrow. But at the same time, you do know over a certain period of time, investments are going to go up probably 10% if you invest them wisely as an average. And so there's a balance of those two. And it's not wrong to invest. I want to buy a house someday. I want to, do some other big purchase, or I want to be able to retire or go on a vacation or whatever else it is. Invest for that. Put away money for that. Matthew chapter 25 and verse number 27. Thou oughtest therefore to have put my money to the exchangers, and then at my coming I should have received mine own usury. The Lord gives a story of a man who leaves money with 3 different servants. 2 of them invest it and return double, and 1 buries it in the ground. And God does not want us to get to heaven and say, well, Lord, I just didn't do anything with what you gave me. He wants us to invest. He wants us to use it wisely. And I think he expects me to be prepared for my retirement years, but I think he's also going to take care of me, but he also tells me to prepare. It is wrong to presume. Is it wrong to presume upon the future? And that's a good question. Go back to James. And then we'll got a couple more questions coming up. Where should we lay up our treasure? And specifically, we get back to James chapter 5, verse 4. How do we violate the principles of verse 4? And so you might want to read that and make a response there as well. But let's look at James chapter 4, verses 13 through 17. Go to now, ye that say, today or tomorrow we will go into such city, continue there a year and buy and sell and get gain, whereas you know not what shall be on the morrow. For what is your life? Is even a vapor that appears for a little time and then vanishes away. But you ought to say, if the Lord will, we shall live and do this or that. But now you rejoice in your boastings, all such rejoicing is evil. Therefore to him that knoweth to do good and doeth it not, to him it is sin. And so it's wrong to presume upon the future, but it's not wrong to invest and prepare for the future either. And so there's a balance of those two. Okay, and then where should we lay up treasure? Matthew chapter 6, verses 19 through 21.
Real quick to comment on
Sure.
your last point. I think another practical way of putting it is we do need to remember that tomorrow is another day, and like the prodigal son did not remember.
Right.
He went out and through riotous
Spent it
living
all.
spent it all, and
Proverbs says, go to the ant, thou sluggard.
Yeah,
And he lays up for the winter.
exactly.
And
But that, like you said, it's a balance of the two. It's not getting so caught up and consumed with tomorrow that we forget that, hey, I only have guaranteed right this moment, and the next one could be gone. And Solomon talks about this in Ecclesiastes as well. At some point, you need to step back and enjoy the fruit of your labor.
right. So good. Okay, so Matthew 6, 19 through 21. Again, lay not for yourself treasure upon earth, where moth and rust doth corrupt. Where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. And so lay up the treasure in such a way, in such a place that it's going to be your heart. And so again, I don't think it's wrong to invest, but I look at investment as the better I invest for retirement, the longer I can serve the Lord. There's going to come a point I can't be a pastor of this church anymore because of my age. I just wouldn't be fair to the church. But I don't want to stop serving the Lord. But if I don't have anything saved up, what am I going to do? I have to go work at Walmart and be a greeter there. Hey, welcome to Walmart, in order to get some money on my plate. So I want to invest so I can serve the Lord. I want to invest so I can, what is it Dave Ramsey said? so that you
Live
can
like
give,
no one else.
live like no one else. You can live like no one else, and you can give like no one else. And it's not just about living, but it's also about giving. And so we need to really keep that in mind. Okay, go back to James chapter 5, verse 4. It says, "Behold, the hire the laborers who hath reaped down your fields, which is of you kept back by fraud, crieth, and the cries of them which have reaped are entered into the ears of the Lord of Sabbath." So, how many of you have laborers that work for you? I mean, personally, you may be a boss at work, but I mean, you have people go out in the field and do labor. We just don't have servants or laborers or all. So does this not apply to us at all? Or how would you apply verse 2 to us as Christians? Does it apply to us? So how would you apply that aspect of that? So is there any responses at all to that?
Not quite yet.
Okay. And I think there's a couple ways that we do that as Christians quite often. And by the way, the Lord of the Sabbath, we're going to look at that a little bit later on. It means the Lord of hosts or armies. It denotes judgment. And so we'll take a look at that a little further on. But so how do we as Christians violate this principle? If I don't have anybody working in the field for me, how do I violate that? So any thoughts or comments? Do you have anything you want to throw in there while we're waiting for them to go online?
Sure. One thing that popped into my mind is just this idea of, I recently bought a new guitar, and I got it for something I've been praying about. I had waited on buying it full price in the store, and a couple months later, to clarify, the guitar that I was playing was literally coming apart. Long story with that.
Since you were in high school, I think.
Yeah, I've had it since junior high. And so anyways, all that to say, one finally popped up on Facebook for a very good deal. It was literally half the price of what it was in the store. And we're talking a pretty major price cut on this. And it turned out to be a young military guy who was leaving the island, his very first PCS after doing 2 tours here, and had bought a house while he was here. So he was trying to figure out, I got to get renters in the house. And then people keep sharing their horror stories of PCSing with them. And so he's freaking out about it all. And so he's just trying to get rid of everything. And someone asked me, well, did you try to talk him down? When I went to buy the guitar, they asked, well, did you try to talk him down? I said, no, I didn't feel right about it. Mm-hmm. I already knew this was a crazy good deal. I knew what the guitar was worth and what he probably could have gotten from it. I wasn't going to offer him more, but I felt bad enough that for him in the situation that he was in. I didn't want to try to keep undercutting him.
Take advantage of him.
Yeah, I didn't want to take advantage of,
and that's what he's
where
talking
he was
about
at.
here, yeah.
And I know what it's been like when we were moving back to Hawaii and we were having a garage sale and having people come up and take things that were very meaningful to us, things that we'd gotten as wedding gifts or our first as a married couple, and people are like, I'll give you 50 cents for it. And like that's not a great feeling of just people taking advantage of you. And I didn't want to do that to this guy. And I think sometimes we can take that overboard and always looking for the deal, or especially personal relationships. You see this all the time, and this is something that as I do photography on the side, and it's always awkward when someone's going, well, what kind of deal are you going to cut me? And I'm going, like, when you do the math, I'm already not making that much per hour, and you want me to make even less per hour. It's just kind of, we are always looking for that deal, that steal, rather than, okay, let me make sure that they're paid what they're worth.
Right. And there's a balance to that. I'm a bargain hunter, and I want to get the best price I can. But I think there's times we do take advantage of people, especially Christians can do this with other Christians. Because, well, you cut hair, so why not just do it for free for me? Or you're a mechanic, come fix my car for free. Now, a lot of times that's what we need to do, because here's a widow lady or a single mom, doesn't have the money to fix their car. Hey, we should be right there ready to help. That's our job as Christians. But at the same time, you got the money to pay for it, because this is how this person earns their living. And I know a lot of people have personal businesses that it hurts them. When they help somebody else as a Christian and they're being asked to give a lower price, they could be earning more money. You're taking money out of their pocket, because while they're working for you, they could be working for somebody else at twice the price. And many times, like you said, they're already giving you a bargain. They're already giving you, many times Christians are the best price people because they're not greedy. Secondly, a lot of times, I know most Christians, I know Caleb has a little different price he gives to those he knows than those he doesn't know. And many times he's offered them, here's the price, and it's lower than the normal price, and they want to go even lower. And there's a couple of cases where he's done that because this was somebody who couldn't afford it. He said,
Yeah.
"This I can give my services to you," and he's actually given those services. And I know, like Jason Sandbeck has a business doing repair work, and he's done that too. But too often I've seen Christians take advantage of that. And that's where we violate this, because that's what they were doing. They were taking advantage of their workers instead of paying them what they were worth.
So here's a great
And they
other
could afford to do.
Here's a great another verse that was shared about this, Jeremiah 22:13. Woe unto him that buildeth his house by unrighteousness, and his chambers by wrong, that useth his neighbor's service without wages, and giveth him not for his work. And you've got that later on down under not under letter I, not being fair in paying debts.
So was Jeremiah what?
Jeremiah 22:13.
Yeah. And that's where we come down to that. And I even mentioned that here, number 2, right below letter H there, is not paying our bills, is one of the ways we as Christians. I see so many Christians that don't pay their bills. And I was the principal of a Christian school, and I was amazed at the number of Christian parents who did not pay their school bill. And in some cases, couldn't afford it. And as a school, we were right there saying, hey, I can tell you honestly, we brought a lot of kids in that Christian school that couldn't pay for school, but we wanted them in there and give them that opportunity. But there was a lot of parents, and I remember one set of parents, they couldn't pay their school bill, but they just bought a new couch. And to me, they violated all this principle. Romans 13:8 says, "Owe no man anything but to love one another, for he that loveth another hath fulfilled the law." And so we need to make sure we do that. And it's not taking care of those in the ministry as well. The labor is worthy of his hire. We need to take care of those that are in the ministry. And when you don't take care of people in the ministry, you're taking advantage of them. You wouldn't go into a restaurant and have food and walk out without paying for it. And you shouldn't go into church without paying for that service. Now again, we're here to serve for free. I'm not looking to be paid. I don't charge for weddings. I don't charge for funerals. I don't charge for preaching a service that you have. If you want me to, I can stand there and give you a half-hour sermon. I'll give you a price on it, come to your house, give it to you personally, and I'll give you a real good deal on that. But we ought to be taking care of the missionaries. We ought to be taking care of the evangelists. We ought to be taking care of our pastors or Christian workers. And when we don't, we're violating this principle. And I think that's one of the things we need to realize. Okay, any other comments you wanted to share there? Okay, we're going to stop there. It looks like we're running out of time. We're going to talk about what are the charges against the rich here. I've got a great quote that's going to come next week, and so Cole, get ready for that great quote. But we've got a couple things coming up, so look at those, and then we'll continue on with the study.